The current affairs program called Gallery came on, and I was its first presenter. Then some upstart from Christchurch called Des Monaghan brought out another guy called Brian Edwards up, and they supplanted me, or they sort of sat alongside. So Brian and Des were the face of Gallery in '68. A woman called Darren, '68 and '69, and then Darren Shanahan came up and was a researcher, and I had some famous quarrel with Des and walked out on my birthday, my wife's birthday in 1969. I began the Landmarks idea for South Pacific Television in 1978-79, and first of all I had to find a presenter, and there were two candidates. One was called Keith Sinclair, who was the historian. I did a little pilot with him, and then there was another guy called Cumberland, who was a geographer, and I'd heard him broadcast. He had a wonderful deep North Country voice, and Tony Isaac had just made The Governor, which was highly political, and when I did the pilot with Keith Hunter, we shot at the Coromandel, with Keith Sinclair, I realized that the material he was covering was pretty similar to what Tony Isaac had covered in The Governor, the politics of it. And I saw Cumberland's brief was the transformation of the landscape of New Zealand by people few in number, far from their home in a very short time. And it was immediately translatable into the screen. It was down home, easy to follow, and he had much more sort of charisma or gravitas on screen than Keith Sinclair. So I did a pilot with him, which they liked, and we got together with the Department of Education and we drafted a series of 10 episodes, which we made from 1979 through 1980 to 1981, and it was broadcast in the winter of 1981. Tom approached me to start the TV3 applications. It was a bit of a risk. A guy called Bill Earl had the Wellington franchise. Bill didn't realize, I don't think, that he was expected to raise the money himself and raise all the capital to set up the company. And he accepted the offer subsequently from Michael Horton to go with their bid. So I found myself back in my hometown in Wellington hustling the money and the brief to get the third television channel started and raising the money here. I quite enjoyed it. And of course we won. But it took 3 years to do that. And although we won the warrant, that coincided with the complete deregulation of broadcasting. So TV3 was launched both against the background of the collapse of the economy after the crash and the deregulation of the system. So during that time we'd been trying to weather the crisis within TV3 and get started. And I found myself, and the company was taken over, and because of the various toing and froings. So when TV3 started, its remit had totally changed. We had won the warrant on a much more public service arrangement, but the combination of the crash and the deregulation that Richard Prebble brought in changed the climate exactly. And the TV3 that finally got to air in 1989 didn't have any time for the kind of programs that I wanted to make. So while they indulged me briefly as head of documentaries, I was soon let go and resumed my career now as an independent for the company I started. And that's where I've been ever since 1989. That's nearly 20 years now. And in that time I've been making a variety of documentary series in the new climate as best I can. I made a series for the start of TV3 called Kia ora Bonjour. I took Howard Morrison to Paris. I did great New Zealand river journeys with Sam Hunt and Linda Top and John Gadsby. I did the Mystery of North Head. And then there's a series called First Hand, which a colleague called Richard Thomas devised, where we used the new Hayek cameras to put them in the hands of young people and train them. And it's amazing the legacy of that initiative. You took Leanne Pooley, Alan Urson, Peter Carey, a whole selection of young people we were able to train. You don't get those opportunities now, and we sort of organised the programs, and they each had a couple of years making a program every 2 months, which they shot themselves, edited themselves. You saw in the paper that at Massey University someone had done work on molecules which showed that molecular evidence of Maori women was consistent with their founding population being the same number as the traditional Maori waka. So science was somehow able to confirm the traditional belief. So I found that was all genetic, molecular work was consistent with the Maori's own traditional beliefs. And then I said maybe we could do a program taking the DNA of Maori and seeing where they came from. And then I put it as a 3-part series, and TVNZ didn't want it, TV3 didn't want it. And then Sue Woodfield at TV3 says, George, if you can use 2 of our presenters, you're on for 1 hour. So from the network which I helped to found came the opportunity 15 years later, to concentrate into 45 minutes, the big thing I'd always wanted to make. Oscar was on, and I found Nathan, his mate Nathan Raderi, and we cooked up the plan where we'd get their DNA, and we knew that it would probably take them back to Taiwan. So we had the swabs done. We knew, we didn't tell them what the answers were, but we knew, and I plotted a course back through the Pacific for Taiwan. Oscar and Nate were great. It was a wonderful modern version of my lofty public service ideals reduced to a very accessible, quick kind of 45 minutes, which is still doing very well for me. Dan Salmon directed it. Sue Woodfield said to me, "You're not directing it, George, you're far too old." So I did it with Dan. Oscar and Nate were great. They didn't charge. We had to go to all these places. There's no way I could do it on a normal budget. So I raised money from Taiwan. I raised money from various airlines and bumped the budget up and made it. And Oscar and Nate were great. I learned enough. I'd accumulated sufficient scar tissue during my Polynesian things with the Maoris to know there was no way I would get away with a program which purported from a test tube to tell Maori where they came from. So I knew that we should have to take them each back to their home marae, do it in front of their people, and I was very careful about all that. And Oscar and Nathan were up for it, and so we made a really good little program a couple of years ago. In the process of that, I realized that the guy who had invented all this was a New Zealander, who the scientist who had done all the breakthroughs, was the brother of Gary Wilson, who worked with Derek Fox for Mana News. So I said, bugger me days, I didn't know this. And I actually realized that this total turnaround in the way evolution is measured and counted was worked out by a Pukekohe farm boy who went to King's College and then Otago and spent most of his life in Berkeley. And that he had died in 1991, but no bugger knew his story. And I thought, this is a good one. Of course I took it to TVNZ and they didn't want to know. But because the Made in Taiwan was shot in high def, I scored a trip to Banff in Canada to show it at a festival there. Berkeley was on the way back. So when I came back from Banff, I popped in at Berkeley and pitched it to them. And in the end they said, we'll help you. And on the base, and somebody one of this guy's students put cash to help me do some research. I bought a little Z1P Sony camera, hired a cameraman and whipped around the world, visiting all the students, made a little pilot. Berkeley said, that's great, how much do you want to finish? And so they raised the money I actually needed. And that was hugely satisfying, still telling a New Zealand story, telling a story about us, doing it for an American university, to meeting their scientific standards as well. They were doing it as a teaching video, but I still wanted to make it accessible. And that was quite a stretch, but a wonderful story in a way. I was lucky to get first crack at it. This time I directed it myself. And it took me 18 months or so to make it. But I was pleased just to be able to get it accepted by Berkeley. I had the wit to invite one of their own professors to read it for me. And interestingly, he was from the other side of the debate. He was a paleontologist. Wilson had been the molecular way. So it was a huge compliment to Alan Wilson and to me that a distinguished scientist from a different discipline should agree to read the damn thing for me. He read it wonderfully, as you'll hear. Berkeley loved it. The biggest distributor in America bought it within 3 days of my finishing it. And I was astonished